Social media can look glamorous, curated feeds, viral stunts, and the rush of likes. But behind the filters are cautionary tales of people chasing attention in reckless ways. In this video, we're covering 6 of the dumbest influencer deaths ever caught on camera. It was May 28, 2016, in Big Sur, California. The coastal highway was crowded with weekend travelers pulling over at scenic overlooks, each drawn to the sweeping views of cliffs dropping into the Pacific. At Bixby Creek Bridge, tourists leaned against the guardrail for photos, keeping a safe distance from the edge. Jessica Bloom was 22, a college dropout from Fresno trying to build an online following through extreme selfies. Though she was terrified of heights in private, she masked that fear by mocking caution and posting curated images that made her look bold. Friends knew her as careless and impulsive, more interested in likes than safety. She was fueled by peer validation, chasing a digital image of herself that never matched reality. Bixby Creek Bridge stood over 260 feet above jagged rocks and surf. The guardrails were designed for vehicle safety, not for climbing or leaning over. Signs warned visitors to stay back from the cliff edges, where gravel and soil could shift underfoot. Tourists typically took photos from stable ground, but Jessica pushed for the most dangerous angle possible. Her friend, reluctantly serving as cameraman, watched as she planned to perch on the outside of the railing, insisting that danger made the shot authentic. Several other visitors kept their distance, shaking their heads at her behavior. Despite visible signs warning against climbing past the barriers, Jessica slipped around the guardrail, balancing only inches from the drop. She laughed, saying she'd get more likes the closer she leaned out. The tension built as she adjusted her stance. Her friend raised the phone, hesitating, but Jessica insisted he start shooting. A gust of wind rattled her hair, and she bent backwards slightly over the drop, one hand on the rail and one hand raised in a mock victory pose. Onlookers froze, sensing how little stability she had on the shifting ground. It was a stunt with no margin for error, and everyone watching knew it. Everyone except Jessica, who seemed more focused on looking fearless than staying safe. And then, the slip came fast. Her right foot lost purchase, and her body twisted awkwardly. She clutched at the guardrail, but her fingers caught only for a second before giving way. Some nearby tourists thought they heard a brief scream, but the wind and waves swallowed the sound almost instantly. She plummeted more than 200 feet, struck the cliffside once, then disappeared into the churning waves below. The echoing sound of impact and the spray of water stunned the crowd into silence. Emergency calls flooded in within minutes. The Coast Guard dispatched boats and helicopters, but the cliffs below the bridge had no safe access, forcing rescuers to rely entirely on air and water. By the time crews reached the area, only disturbed water and scattered debris were visible at the base of the cliff. Her body was carried out to sea before being found days later. The official report listed the cause of death as blunt force trauma and drowning. Authorities emphasized that guardrails and posted warnings were ignored. Meanwhile, her Instagram account became a target for both condolences and ridicule. Within a week, her family requested the platform take it down. It was July 16, 2017, near Colchester in Essex, England. The countryside rail line cut cleanly through fields, its tracks humming faintly with distant traffic. A handful of commuters lingered on a nearby platform, unaware that a teenager setting up a camera just down the line was minutes away from a fatal miscalculation. Darren Cook was 19, a part-time retail worker from Chelmsford, who ran a small YouTube channel dedicated to epic train videos. His content rarely gained traction, but he convinced himself that risk was the key to growing his audience. He was known among friends for ignoring rules, especially those related to railways. His obsession wasn't fueled by sponsorships or brand deals. It was pure ego, a desire to appear daring, even if it meant endangering himself. The rail near Colchester carried frequent high-speed trains, with clear signage warning trespassers to keep off. The speed and wind pressure of a passing train created unpredictable turbulence that could easily unbalance someone too close to the line. Tripods, cameras, and bodies had no safe place within the clearance zone. Experienced enthusiasts filmed trains from platforms or designated viewing areas, but Darren's reckless plan demanded that he stand just inches from disaster, emphasizing stupidity rather than skill. That afternoon, ignoring warning signs, he and a friend set up a tripod directly beside the tracks. He announced that he wanted a shot of a train thundering past so close it looked like it would graze him. He crouched low, grinning at his own bravado, dismissing the clear risk. Onlookers from the nearby platform saw him positioning himself with deliberate carelessness, as though pushing closer to danger would guarantee views. The train's horn echoed across the fields, growing louder as it approached at over 90 miles per hour. His friend shouted from a distance, urging him to back away, but Darren stayed put, eyes locked on the lens. His posture tightened as the machine drew near, the sound vibrating through the rails. Some witnesses on the platform later admitted they assumed he would jump clear at the last moment. Instead, he hunkered lower. Unsurprisingly, this stunt ended in disaster. The front of the train struck him with devastating force, snapping his body sideways. He spun through the air and slammed onto the gravel beside the tracks, his camera knocked from its mount. The train continued past in seconds, leaving only stunned bystanders staring at his unmoving body. Emergency services arrived quickly after multiple calls from the platform. Paramedics assessed him immediately, but the trauma was unsurvivable. He was pronounced dead at the scene. British Transport Police launched an investigation, but quickly determined it was a case of trespassing and reckless behavior. The footage was seized as evidence. Within weeks, his YouTube channel disappeared, its handful of videos erased without explanation. The recording circulated only in fragments online, detached from his name and context. For viewers who stumbled on it, it wasn't a person's final moments, just another clip in the churn of online spectacle. It was October 17, 2015, in Moscow, Russia. The city was already sliding into the early darkness of autumn, streets slick from a light drizzle, traffic buzzing far below. The lights of unfinished high-rises marked new districts rising quickly, but often left unsecured. Igor Mikhailov, 24, worked as a delivery driver for a courier service, hauling parcels across the sprawling city. He lived with his parents in a modest flat on the outskirts and rarely drew attention outside his small circle of friends. But online, he tried to reinvent himself. He idolized urban explorers and rooftop daredevils, whose videos drew millions of views. He launched a small account, copying their stunts with little skill. His clips were shaky, low quality, but he believed more daring content would help him stand out. Risk didn't register to him as caution. It registered as a way to prove himself. The world of rooftop climbing was already controversial in Moscow. The practice involved sneaking into restricted construction zones, climbing cranes, and hanging from ledges for photographs or videos. Those who excelled were trained free climbers. Mikhailov was not. He had no training, no protective equipment, and no real plan. He wore sneakers worn from work, jeans, and a thin jacket. That evening, Mikhailov went out drinking with two friends before leading them toward a half-finished high-rise. The building stood about 15 stories tall, its stairwells open and littered with construction debris. Fencing was down in several places, and access was easy, despite warnings posted around the site about unstable structures and unauthorized entry. Mikhailov pushed forward. It was a dumb idea from the start, but he treated it like a performance. His plan was to film himself hanging by one arm from the top floor's exposed concrete edge, mimicking videos he had seen online. His friends hesitated, telling him it was pointless, but he pressed them into filming anyway. Alcohol sharpened his bravado, muting the obvious risk. The climb up was straightforward. They moved past piles of rebar and loose boards, stepping through unfinished staircases until they reached the open rooftop. From there, Mikhailov announced his plan again, insisting the stunt would be quick. He set his phone recording in his pocket while one friend aimed another phone to capture the scene. He edged onto the ledge, turned toward the city, and crouched into position. He gripped the rough concrete with both hands, then deliberately released one, letting himself dangle with just his right arm. For several seconds, he grinned and shouted for his friends to adjust their angle, urging them to get the shot. But when he tried to get up, his sneakers scuffed against the wall, scraping chips of cement. The drizzle had left the surface slick. Within seconds, his hand shifted. Mikhailov's body dropped the full height of the structure, his fall uninterrupted. His friends, frozen for an instant, then bolted down the stairwell, stumbling over debris to reach the ground. By the time they arrived, his body was sprawled on the wet pavement near the building's base. Emergency services arrived quickly. After a bystander reported the commotion, police taped off the base of the building and noted the death as a trespass-related accident. Construction workers who arrived the next morning confirmed the site had already suffered repeated breaches by thrill-seekers. The incident was filed as an accidental death. Mikhailov's family was devastated, pressing authorities to ensure the footage never circulated. For his family, it was nothing more than a needless death, driven by a pursuit of views that never came. It was March 12, 2018, at Iguazu Falls on the Argentina-Brazil border. Tourists crowded walkways and platforms, mist rising in steady gusts that made everything slick. Signs warned against leaving marked trails, yet barriers never seemed to stop people looking for a better photo. Carla Mendez, 27, worked as a receptionist at a mid-range hotel in São Paulo. She was known among co-workers for being talkative, often trying to embellish ordinary events to seem more exciting. In recent years, she tried to rebrand herself online as a travel personality. Her following was small, but she posted constantly, exaggerating her trips and editing photos to suggest adventure. But Mendez had no sponsors to fund her travels. She wanted them, though, and believed dangerous antics would help her stand out. But risk wasn't calculated for her. It was a prop to make her life look dramatic. Iguazu Falls spans more than 200 individual cascades, with torrents of water dropping into deep chasms. Tourists are restricted to platforms with railings, since the surrounding rocks are slick with constant spray. Trained guides warn repeatedly that climbing over barriers is dangerous. Mendez wore casual sneakers, jeans, and a light blouse, entirely unsuited for slippery rock surfaces. Her decision to go beyond the barriers wasn't bold. It was the move of an outright idiot. That morning, Mendez joined co-workers on a day trip to the park. The group walked the standard routes, taking photos at marked lookouts. Mendez, however, was fixated on creating a live stream segment where she would appear to be closer to the falls than anyone else. Weather conditions made it riskier. Spray was heavier than usual, and rocks along the edge glistened with a sheen of water. Warnings were clear, but Mendez brushed them aside. She told her co-workers to keep the camera on her as she climbed past a guardrail. She moved onto uneven rock slabs where footing was poor. The roar of the falls drowned out normal speech, but the live stream showed her narrating and waving toward her phone as if she were an adventurer. She crouched, then stood upright with her back to the cascade, raising her arm to frame the shot. Co-workers kept filming, nervous but unwilling to intervene. Tension grew as Mendez edged closer, slipping slightly once before catching herself. Instead of stopping, she tried to make it look intentional, grinning at the camera. Moments later, her left sneaker slid across the wet surface. She flailed, her phone arm jerking upward, and her other hand reached out for balance. She lost footing entirely. She let out a scream, the device slipping from her grasp as she toppled sideways toward the torrent. Mendez's body tumbled into the churning water, immediately swept toward the main drop. Several tourists further down caught glimpses of her figure in the spray before it disappeared into the cascade. Rescue staff were summoned quickly by bystanders, but conditions near the falls made retrieval difficult. Argentine and Brazilian park authorities coordinated in recovery efforts, and after several hours, her body was located on a rocky outcrop more than half a mile away. She had sustained massive trauma from the force of the water and impact against rocks. Her remains were carried out under tarps to shield them from onlookers. The phone, recovered by park staff, contained the live stream footage that later corroborated the witness's account. For her co-workers, the incident was crushing. They had been filming what they assumed would be a routine stunt, only to watch her disappear in front of them. Back in São Paulo, the hotel offered counseling sessions, but most of the group avoided discussing it openly, speaking of her only in brief and uneasy fragments. Within weeks, they returned to their normal shifts, yet the memory of standing behind a camera as she fell stayed with them, an unspoken weight in the workplace. It was July 2nd, 2017, at an outdoor public gun range just outside Houston, Texas. The afternoon was hot and noisy, filled with sharp cracks of gunfire and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Families, hobbyists, and seasoned shooters shared lanes, each following range rules meant to keep chaos from becoming disaster. In the middle of that structured environment, one reckless act, fueled by ego and intoxication, would end in tragedy. Marcus Boyd was 20 years old, unemployed, and known among friends for his reckless personality. He had built a reputation in his small circle for recording outrageous stunts and posting them online. His content often revolved around mocking firearm safety, twirling pistols, pretending to aim at friends, or cracking jokes about being fearless. Friends later acknowledged that alcohol usually played a role, though he masked it with swagger until the recklessness became obvious. Alcohol and firearms made a stupid mix, but Boyd treated it as entertainment. The gun range was open to the public, a mix of regular shooters and casual visitors looking for an afternoon diversion. Lanes stretched side by side under a metal awning, brass casings scattered across the concrete floor. Rules were posted. No alcohol, no horseplay, no loaded weapons behind the line. But enforcement often relied on trust more than oversight. Range officers made rounds, but with the number of guests cycling in and out, not every infraction was caught. Boyd had a .38 special revolver earlier that day. The danger wasn't the gun itself, but the way he used it, treating it as a toy rather than a lethal tool. That afternoon, Boyd arrived at the range with 3 friends. They brought cameras to record him shooting rifles and handguns for his small YouTube channel. His friends later recalled him sneaking beers from a backpack between turns, his laughter louder and more erratic as the day wore on. Despite the clear, no alcohol signage, no one outside his group immediately noticed. After firing several ordinary rounds into a target, Boyd suddenly announced that it was time for the real video. He loaded and fired multiple times again, showing nothing unusual. Then he spun the revolver's cylinder in front of the cameras, insisting it was unloaded, as if for show. His friends, thinking it was just another exaggerated stunt, kept filming as he swayed unsteadily with the weapon in his hand. Seconds later, he pressed the revolver under his chin and pulled the trigger. The report was deafening, different in tone from the earlier controlled shots. Blood spilled into the concrete floor. Boyd collapsed instantly, the revolver clattering beside him. His friends screamed and stunned nearby shooters. Then range officers rushed in, shouting for everyone to back away as they tried to stanch the bleeding while dialing 911. Witnesses described the attempt as frantic but hopeless. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, but Boyd was declared dead on sight. Police later confiscated the weapon and interviewed witnesses. Toxicology confirmed Boyd had been drinking, a direct violation of range rules and state safety laws. The video footage was reviewed during the investigation, leaving no doubt about what had happened. In the weeks after, the range drew scrutiny. Management quietly increased staffing and added bag checks, a move regulars said was the first real tightening of rules they had ever seen. Some longtime shooters stopped bringing families, unsettled by how quickly the controlled environment had unraveled. In online gun forums, the case was dissected in detail, not to glorify Boyd, but to underline how alcohol and firearms had no place together. It was September 17th, 2017 in Quezon City, Metro Manila. A tropical storm had passed through earlier that day, leaving flooded streets, downed branches, and tangled power lines across neighborhoods. Most residents stayed indoors, wary of unstable structures and live wires in standing water. In one street, however, a reckless attempt to turn danger into entertainment would end in a fatal accident. Julius Ramos was 23, a part-time delivery rider and small-time YouTuber. He ran a channel called Pinoy Extreme Hacks, where he performed reckless DIY stunts and pranks, wiring car batteries to light bulbs with bare hands, faking electrocutions on neighbors, or dangling from rooftops for laughs. Friends described him as stubborn and cocky, often laughing off safety warnings as if they were challenges. Even power linemen and barangay officers had told him directly to stay away from electrical equipment, but he treated their advice as background noise. Electrical systems in storm-damaged areas are especially unforgiving. Sagging lines carry high voltage, and water turns the ground into a conductor, magnifying the risk of electrocution. Linemen work with insulated tools, rubber gloves, and protective gear to manage such hazards, using trained coordination and system shutdowns to prevent deaths. Ramos had none of this. He wrongly believed a bamboo pole would insulate him, not realizing that once soaked in rainwater, it became as dangerous as a metal rod. His only tool was a wet bamboo pole, cut from a nearby tree. The idea of lifting a live wire with something soaked in rainwater showed not only ignorance of electricity, but willful disregard for common sense. That afternoon, while others cleared debris and waited for utility crews, Ramos saw opportunity. He told his cousin he wanted to film himself fixing a sagging line that hung low over the street. He framed it as a life hack, proof that ordinary people didn't need professionals. Neighbors immediately warned him not to go near it, shouting that linemen were on their way. Ramos laughed, saying he would beat utility crews to it. His cousin reluctantly kept the phone rolling. The storm had left ankle-deep water in the gutter. Ramos walked barefoot into the flooded section of road, grinning as though on stage. He raised the bamboo pole, wobbling slightly in the current, and looked into his cousin. The wire sagged heavily, weighed down by debris and rain. He jabbed at it twice before finally hooking it. The instant the wet pole touched the line, there was a sharp crack. Sparks burst and a bright flash lit the air. Electricity shot through the pole and into Ramos's body. Witnesses said his muscles stiffened instantly, his back arched, and within seconds he collapsed. falling face first into the water. His cousin dropped the camera as smoke hissed from Ramos's shirt. Neighbors stood frozen, some running toward him, then pulling back in fear of the water, some phoning for help. The brief convulsions ended almost immediately once he was down, leaving him completely still in the gutter. The wire continued to spark beside him, each sound amplified by the wet silence that followed. For several seconds, no one dared approach. The smell of burnt fabric and ozone lingered. A neighbor finally shouted for help from farther down the street, but no one could risk touching him until linemen cut the power to the line. The cousin sobbed near the doorway, camera still recording but forgotten. Ramos remained motionless, his body half submerged in brown water. Emergency responders arrived about 20 minutes later. By then, Ramos's body showed contact burns across his arms and chest. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Barangay officials confirmed afterward that nearby store security cameras had recorded the entire event, though the footage was withheld due to its disturbing nature. His YouTube channel remained online for several months, drawing curiosity before the family requested its removal. Among locals, the story spread quickly, an example of how chasing attention led him into lethal stupidity. For neighbors who witnessed it, the image of Ramos collapsing into the flood remains an unforgettable warning. Thanks for watching. If these stories of stupid decisions leading to fatalities entertained you, click here for more.